9 silent nerve damage warning signs most people miss. That tingling in your toes when you've been sitting too long. The way your fingertips feel a little clumsy first thing in the morning. Most people blame it on a bad chair, poor circulation, or simply getting older. But for a surprising number of people, none of those are the real explanation, and the actual one is far more important to catch early. This video is for general educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose any condition or replace advice from a qualified healthcare professional. If anything you hear today sounds familiar, the best next step is always a conversation with your doctor. Nerve damage, sometimes called neuropathy, happens when the nerves that carry signals between your brain, spinal cord, and the rest of your body become injured or stop working the way they should. These nerves are responsible for nearly everything you feel and do, from the warmth of a coffee cup in your hand to the balance that keeps you upright when you step off a curb. When they're damaged, the signals they send can become distorted, weakened, or in some cases, they may stop being sent at all. Over the next several minutes, we're going to walk through 9 signs that clinicians and researchers commonly associate with nerve damage. Some of these will feel familiar right away. Others are more subtle, and one sign in particular tends to be the one people notice last, even though it can be one of the more telling ones. We'll get to that one a little later, so if you've ever wondered why your hands feel a little different than they used to, or why your balance isn't quite what it was, stay with us. There are actually different types of nerves involved in this story. Sensory nerves are the ones that let you feel temperature, texture, and pain. Motor nerves are the ones that carry instructions from your brain to your muscles, telling your hand to close around a doorknob or your leg to lift a step higher on uneven ground. And then there are autonomic nerves, which quietly manage things like digestion, heart rate, and sweating, all without you ever having to think about them. Depending on which type of nerve is affected, the signs can look completely different from one person to the next, which is part of why nerve damage is so often misunderstood or mistaken for something else entirely. Number 1, numbness or tingling in the hands and feet. For many people, this is the very first clue that something has changed. It often starts small, a faint tingling in the toes, a patch of skin on the sole of the foot that feels slightly less sensitive than it used to, or fingertips that seem to fumble with buttons or zippers more than they once did. Doctors sometimes describe this as a stocking and glove pattern, because it tends to begin at the farthest points from the spinal cord, the feet, and the hands before potentially moving inward. This happens because the longest nerves in the body are often the first affected when nerve fibers become damaged. The nerves that travel all the way down to your toes have a long journey to make, and that length can make them more vulnerable. Consider Harold, a 71-year-old retired mail carrier. For months, he described his feet as feeling like he was wearing thick socks, even when he was barefoot. He didn't think much of it until he stepped on a small piece of glass in his kitchen and didn't feel it right away. That moment was what finally brought him into his doctor's office. Numbness and tingling like this may be associated with several underlying causes, including diabetes, vitamin deficiencies, or nerve compression. So it's worth discussing with a healthcare provider rather than assuming the cause. What makes this particular sign tricky is how gradually it tends to develop. Unlike an injury, where you can point to the exact moment something happened, nerve-related numbness often creeps in over months or even years. Many people adjust without realizing it, walking a little more carefully, checking bathwater with an elbow instead of a foot, or relying more on sight than feel when doing everyday tasks. These small adaptations can mask the underlying change for a long time, which is exactly why this first sign is worth paying attention to the moment it appears, rather than waiting for it to become more pronounced. Number 2, sharp, burning, or electric shock-like pain. Where the first sign is often about losing sensation, this one is about an unwelcome increase in it. People frequently describe this kind of pain as burning, stabbing, or like a jolt of electricity moving through a limb, sometimes for no clear reason at all. It can appear suddenly, last a few seconds, and then vanish, only to return later without warning. This type of pain, sometimes referred to by doctors as neuropathic pain, tends to happen when damaged nerves misfire, sending pain signals to the brain even when there's no actual injury occurring at that moment. It's a bit like a smoke alarm going off when there's no fire. The wiring itself has become the problem, not the thing it's supposed to be detecting. What makes this sign particularly frustrating for many people is that it often gets worse at night. The distractions of daily life fall away, and suddenly that burning sensation in the feet or the tingling in the hands becomes impossible to ignore. Sleep can become harder to come by, which in turn can affect mood, energy, and overall well-being. If pain like this is disrupting your rest or your daily routine, it may be helpful to bring it up with a healthcare professional sooner rather than later. Take Ruth, a 64-year-old former schoolteacher, who described the sensation as feeling like her feet were resting on a bed of hot coals every evening after dinner. She tried everything from different shoes to cooling gels, assuming it was simply poor circulation from standing all those years in the classroom. It wasn't until the sensation began waking her up at night that she finally scheduled an appointment and learned that what she was experiencing had a name, and more importantly, that there were ways to manage it once it was properly identified. Her story is a common one, because burning nerve pain is often treated as a lifestyle inconvenience long before it's recognized as a medical symptom worth investigating. Number 3, muscle weakness or trouble gripping objects. Nerves don't only carry information toward the brain, they also carry instructions back out to your muscles. When those outgoing signals are disrupted, the result can be muscle weakness that seems to appear out of nowhere. Jars that used to open easily suddenly feel impossible. A coffee cup slips from the hand a little more often than it should. Buttoning a shirt takes noticeably longer. Consider Dorothy, a 68-year-old grandmother who loved knitting scarves for her grandchildren every winter. She began noticing that her hands tired more quickly than usual, and her stitches became less precise, not because her eyesight had changed, but because her fingers weren't responding the way they always had. It wasn't until she dropped a hot pan in her kitchen, unable to keep a firm enough grip, that she realized something deeper might be going on. This kind of weakness may be associated with damage to motor nerves specifically, the nerves responsible for muscle movement, and it can sometimes progress gradually enough that people adapt without realizing how much has changed. Noticing a pattern of dropped items or difficulty with fine motor tasks is worth mentioning to a doctor, particularly if it continues or worsens over time. Weakness can also show up in the legs and feet, sometimes in a way that's described as foot drop, where the front of the foot doesn't lift as easily while walking, occasionally causing the toes to catch or drag against the ground. People often describe adjusting their gait without quite understanding why, lifting the knee a little higher than usual with each step to avoid tripping. This kind of compensation can become so automatic that it goes unnoticed by the person experiencing it, even while it's plainly visible to family members or friends walking beside them. Number 4, loss of balance and coordination. Balance depends on a constant stream of information from the nerves in your feet and legs, telling your brain exactly where your body is in space, even without you looking down. When those nerves are damaged, that information can become unreliable, and the result is often a subtle but noticeable change in coordination. People sometimes describe feeling like they're walking on an uneven surface, even when the ground is perfectly flat. Others notice they've started reaching for walls or furniture for support without really thinking about it, almost as a reflex. This is sometimes referred to as sensory ataxia, and it reflects how much your nervous system relies on constant feedback from your feet to keep you steady. This sign matters not just because of how it feels, but because of what it may lead to. Falls become more likely when balance is compromised, and for older adults especially, a fall can have serious consequences. If you or someone you love has started to feel less steady on their feet, especially in dim lighting or on uneven surfaces, it may be worth having that evaluated rather than simply becoming more cautious and moving on. One detail doctors often ask about is whether balance gets noticeably worse in the dark or with the eyes closed, for instance, while washing hair in the shower. That's because when the nerves that report foot position are damaged, the eyes end up compensating for the missing information. So removing visual input can suddenly make instability far more obvious. It's a simple but telling detail, and it's one of the reasons a thorough medical evaluation often includes more than just a quick glance at how someone walks across a room. Number 5, increased sensitivity to touch. This next sign can be surprising because it's almost the opposite of numbness. Instead of feeling less, some people with nerve damage begin to feel too much. A bedsheet resting on the foot at night can feel unexpectedly painful. A light tap on the arm might feel disproportionately intense. Doctors refer to this heightened, sometimes painful response to normally harmless touch as allodynia. This happens because damaged nerves can become hypersensitive, essentially turning up the volume on sensory signals that shouldn't be alarming in the first place. It's an unusual experience for most people to describe to others, because on the surface, nothing looks different about the skin or the limb involved. The change is happening in how the nervous system is interpreting ordinary sensation, not in the body part itself. For some, this sensitivity becomes disruptive enough to affect daily comfort, from choosing looser clothing to avoiding certain fabrics altogether. If everyday touch has started to feel unusually intense or uncomfortable, that shift is worth mentioning at your next medical appointment, since it can offer useful clues about what's happening beneath the surface. It's worth pointing out that allodynia and numbness can sometimes exist in the very same limb, which understandably confuses many people. A person might describe their foot as feeling both dull to pressure and painfully sensitive to the lightest touch, seemingly contradictory sensations happening at once. This isn't unusual when nerves are damaged, because different types of nerve fibers within the same limb can be affected in different ways and to different degrees, producing this layered, sometimes confusing mix of symptoms. Number 6, muscle twitching or cramping. Small, involuntary muscle movements are common and usually harmless. Most people have experienced an eyelid twitch or a brief calf cramp at some point. But when these twitches, known medically as fasciculations, become frequent, persistent, or start appearing in multiple areas of the body, they may be worth paying closer attention to. These involuntary movements can occur when damaged motor nerves send irregular, spontaneous signals to muscle fibers, causing them to contract without any conscious effort behind it. Nighttime leg cramps in particular are something many people brush off as ordinary, especially as they get older, but a pattern of frequent, unexplained cramping alongside other symptoms on this list may point to something worth investigating further. It's worth noting that twitching alone, especially occasional and isolated, is common and often unrelated to any nerve condition. Context matters here more than almost any other sign on this list, which is exactly why tracking your symptoms and discussing the full picture with a healthcare provider tends to be more useful than focusing on any single symptom in isolation. Many people find it helpful to keep a simple written log when they notice recurring twitching or cramping, noting when it happens, how long it lasts, and whether it's paired with any of the other signs we've covered so far. Bringing that kind of detail to a medical appointment can make a real difference, because doctors often have only a short window of time to piece together a pattern that may have been building for months. Number 7, changes in skin, hair, or nail appearance. Not every sign of nerve damage involves how something feels. Sometimes, the clearest signs are things you can actually see. Nerves don't just carry sensory and motor signals. Some of them regulate blood flow, sweat glands, and skin health in the areas they serve. When these nerves are affected, the skin itself can begin to show it. This might appear as skin that looks unusually shiny or thin, hair that stops growing on the lower legs or tops of the feet, or nails that become brittle and grow more slowly than they once did. Consider Frank, a 65-year-old former construction worker, who mentioned to his doctor almost as an afterthought that the hair on his shins had thinned out over the past couple of years. He hadn't connected it to anything, until his doctor explained that this kind of change can sometimes reflect how well nerves are supporting blood flow to that area. These visible changes may be associated with autonomic nerve involvement, referring to the nerves that manage automatic bodily functions you don't consciously control. Because these changes tend to happen slowly, they're easy to miss unless you're specifically looking for them, which is exactly why routine skin checks, especially on the feet, are often recommended for people already managing conditions known to affect nerve health. Temperature can be affected too. Some people notice one foot feels consistently cooler to the touch than the other, even when both are covered by the same blanket or the same pair of socks. This can happen when nerve damage affects the small blood vessels responsible for regulating warmth in the skin, reducing circulation to certain areas over time. A simple habit worth adopting is looking closely at your feet every so often, checking for cuts, calluses, or color changes that might otherwise go unnoticed, particularly since reduced sensation can mean an injury goes unfelt until it's already become more serious. Number 8. Digestive issues, dizziness, or unexpected blood pressure changes. This is the sign that tends to surprise people the most, and it's often the one that gets noticed last, even though it can reveal a great deal about what's happening internally. Nerve damage isn't limited to the nerves you can consciously feel or control. It can also affect the autonomic nervous system, the network responsible for regulating things like digestion, heart rate, and blood pressure entirely in the background, without you ever having to think about it. When these autonomic nerves are affected, people may notice symptoms that don't seem obviously connected to the nervous system at all. This can include feeling unusually full after eating only a small amount, bouts of nausea or bloating without a clear cause, or dizziness and lightheadedness when standing up too quickly. A phenomenon sometimes called orthostatic hypotension, referring to a drop in blood pressure upon standing. Consider Margaret, a 73-year-old widow who had started feeling dizzy nearly every time she stood up from her recliner. She assumed it was simply a normal part of getting older. It wasn't until she mentioned it during a routine appointment, alongside the tingling she'd been feeling in her feet for months, that her doctor began to see a fuller picture. These autonomic symptoms are easy to dismiss individually, but taken together with other signs on this list, they may be an important piece of the puzzle, which is exactly why it's worth mentioning them to a doctor, even if they seem unrelated to nerve health on the surface. Heart rate can be affected as well. Some people notice their heart doesn't seem to speed up the way it used to during exercise, even when the activity feels just as demanding as it always has. Others notice the opposite, a heart rate that seems to race for no obvious reason. Because these autonomic nerves influence so many different systems at once, the resulting symptoms can feel scattered and unrelated, which is precisely why doctors tend to ask detailed questions about digestion, blood pressure, and heart rate together when nerve damage is suspected, rather than evaluating each symptom entirely on its own. Number 9. Unusual changes in sweating patterns. The final sign on this list is one that almost nobody thinks to connect to nerve health, and that's exactly why it deserves attention. Sweating might seem like a minor bodily function, but it's actually controlled by a dedicated set of autonomic nerves, and when those nerves are damaged, sweating patterns can shift in noticeable ways. Some people find they sweat far more than they used to, even in cool environments or without physical exertion. Others notice the opposite, areas of the body, often the feet, that no longer sweat at all, even in warm conditions or during exercise, a condition sometimes called anhidrosis. This matters more than it might seem, because sweat plays an important role in regulating body temperature. When the body can't sweat properly in certain areas, it may struggle to cool itself effectively, particularly during physical activity or hot weather. Because this symptom is so easy to overlook, it's often the last piece people mention to their doctor, if they mention it at all. But taken together with any of the other signs we've discussed today, unusual sweating changes may complete a picture that helps guide a more accurate and timely evaluation. Consider Walter, a 70-year-old retired firefighter who spent decades comfortable working in extreme heat. In his 70s, he noticed something strange during a summer afternoon in his garden. His face and chest were soaked with sweat, but his feet remained completely dry, even though the pavement beneath him was hot enough to feel through his shoes. At first, he found it almost amusing, a strange quirk of aging he joked about with his wife. It wasn't until he mentioned it to his doctor during an unrelated visit that the significance became clear. And it turned out to be one more piece of a pattern that had been building quietly for years. Bringing all of this together, nerve damage rarely presents as one dramatic symptom. More often, it shows up as a collection of smaller changes: tingling in the toes, a little more clumsiness with the hands, a bit more unsteadiness on the stairs, that are easy to dismiss individually but tell a clearer story when viewed as a whole. Research on peripheral neuropathy suggests that it affects an estimated 20 million people in the United States alone, making it one of the more common and commonly overlooked neurological concerns people face as they age. If any of these 9 signs sounded familiar today, that doesn't mean something is definitely wrong, but it may be worth having a conversation with a healthcare professional who can properly evaluate what you're experiencing. Nerve health, like so much of our overall health, tends to respond best when changes are caught early rather than left unaddressed. It's also worth remembering that nerve damage isn't always permanent or progressive. In some cases, especially when an underlying cause like a vitamin deficiency or a treatable condition is identified early, symptoms may improve significantly once that cause is addressed. This is part of why early conversations with a healthcare provider matter so much, not because every case is the same, but because knowing what's happening beneath the surface opens the door to options that might not exist if the signs continue to be dismissed or explained away. Think back over the 9 signs we've walked through today. Numbness or tingling that starts in the toes or fingertips, burning or electric shock-like pain that seems to come from nowhere, weakness that makes gripping or lifting harder than it should be, balance that feels less steady, especially with the eyes closed, touch that feels more intense than it used to, twitching or cramping that keeps returning, changes in the skin, hair, or nails that are easy to overlook, digestive shifts, dizziness, or blood pressure changes tied to the autonomic nervous system, and finally, sweating patterns that no longer make sense for the temperature or activity involved. On their own, each of these can have many explanations. Together, they may tell a more complete story worth exploring with a professional. We'd love to hear from you. Have you or someone you know experienced any of these signs, and did you find that they were connected to something else entirely once you spoke with a doctor? Share your experience in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you found this video helpful, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear this today, and subscribe for more videos like this one. We'll see you in the next video.